Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christy Koenig, the EMS Medical Director for the County of San Diego. Thank you so much for joining us for the next lecture in our series of evidence-based medicine presentations. Today's topic is a minimalist guide to quality improvement, and our presenter is Kirby Johnson. Kirby is the Clinical Quality Research Coordinator for the Office of the Medical Director and the Metropolitan Area EMS Authority in Fort Worth, Texas. A paramedic with over 12 years of experience in EMS, Kirby has been instrumental in developing the current Clinical Quality Improvement Program at Metropolitan Area EMS Authority and its 15 participating municipalities and first responder organizations. I've heard her speak before, and she delivers one of the clearest EMS-focused talks I've ever heard on quality improvement. I'm sure you will enjoy and appreciate her lecture. Over to you, Kirby.
Thank you so much, Christy. That was a wonderful introduction. I appreciate it a lot. And thank you all for having me. I do really enjoy sharing lectures. I enjoy talking at conferences. So I was very excited to have this opportunity. And I wanted to make sure that I was able to reach a very large group. So when this came up, I said, yes, absolutely. I will love to present for you. So hopefully you'll be able to take a few things away today from what I have to share. And let me just get my screen popped up and we'll get going. All right, I just want to confirm, can everyone see my screen?
Not yet.
Maybe that's the wrong one.
Yep.
There's always going to be those issues, aren't there? Here we go. Okay, a little bit different. I'm used to a RingCentral platform, if any of you are familiar with that, but here we go. Now I'm set up. So just like Christy mentioned, I have quite a bit of experience at this point in the MedStar system. I also started my career out in East Texas and got some rural experience while I was in paramedic school. So I've been a paramedic for quite a while. I've been at one company for quite a while, but however, I've had a multiple roles within this organization itself. And that's given me a really good opportunity, I think, to have a good foundational understanding of what EMS is and what it can look like. So today, what we're going to cover are some of the very simple basics of quality improvement. And these are things that I've put together over the years that I really realized were kind of lacking in my education, and that I think there's a need for within our industry to kind of talk about on a more simple basis, right? So you can go to conferences and they have these high-level presentations where they'll tell you all of the good, fancy, big things and concepts that you should be learning, which are absolutely wonderful. But what I'd like to do is kind of break that down and give you some good places to start. So if you're new to this, this is definitely absolutely for you. And maybe if you've been doing quality improvement for a while, I hope you're able to pick up some small details that maybe you haven't thought about in a little bit, or that can help you improve of whatever initiative you're working on right now. So sticking with our minimalism, let's talk about what quality in EMS typically looks like. If I can get this shared. I think I'm still having screen sharing issues. I'm so sorry. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that, y'all. So let's talk about what quality in EMS typically looks like. Well, typically, quality in EMS looks like something that is primarily focused on quality assurance, right? So when we're focused on quality assurance, we're looking at an inspection process versus a measurement process. You may have also heard this referred to as quality control, right? So we're kind of pinpointing issues that already exist and that have already happened, and we're dealing with them retroactively. So we find a problem, we deal with it. Find a problem, we deal with it. And in my experience and talking to other services and just, meeting everybody that I have throughout this industry, that's primarily what we tend to do. And I think we're trained to do it that way. It's not our fault that we do it that way, because when we get training, either as physicians or as paramedics or as EMTs or whatever role you're in within the healthcare setting, you're primarily trained to identify a problem and come up with an immediate solution. This process, focusing on quality assurance and dealing with problems one at a time, gives us a very good foundation of dealing with problems on an individual level, maybe meeting with individual crew members and tackling things that they're struggling with in the moment, but you're dealing with the problem one at a time on a small scale. This gives us some short-term solutions to our longer-term problems that are probably a lot bigger than what we can realize in that moment. This process is also where I refer to the good idea fairy living. Now, what I'll say about the good idea fairy is if you're not familiar with her, you probably just have not been made aware of who she is, but she lives and breathes. She's rampant in my system and has been for a while. And we typically have to actively fight her off because she contributes to what I refer to as the QA cycle of doom. So this is where you find the problem, you overreact, you come up with an immediate solution. That gives you a temporary resolution to your problem, and then you end up forgetting that the problem exists to then find out that the problem resurfaces later on. And I'm going to give a shout out real quickly to Dr. Veer Vithalani because he's very familiar with the Good Idea Fairy. And I definitely appreciate everything that he did in his time at MedStar and being the medical director for our system to help me understand what that is and why this process doesn't have to be this way. So what quality could be in EMS is a system that is focused on quality improvement, which means that you're focused on process improvement over individual improvement, right? Improving processes, improving systems over focusing on individual problems and individual issues. This will give you a system that's built on quality data and not going to lead to any data hoarding. Now, what I mean when I'm talking about data hoarding is simply collecting data for the sake of collecting data. And I've seen this happen a lot. I've done it a lot, and I've definitely been a contributor to this. You see a data element, you think that's really interesting. We should definitely be capturing it. And then before you know it, you spend a lot of time just collecting this information and you never do anything with it. So if you're doing good quality improvement that is focused on actual individual efforts, you're not going to have a bunch of data that you're sitting around spending man hours collecting and never using. This will also help you have a system that is supported by a balanced family of evidence-based key measures. And we're going to go into detail about that here in a little bit. But having those things all together is going to give you quality improvement that is sustainable. So this is the end goal that we want. We want each element of this to exist in our system in order to have sustainable quality improvement that will last us for a while. Now, we talk a lot about measures. So what are measures? If you're not familiar with them, here is a QR code for you. This is the National EMS Quality Alliance, or NMSQA. This is a group that has been tasked with completing the work from the EMS Compass project from 2014. And they've been made responsible for developing quality performance measures for our industry. So they specifically focus on pre-hospital and the EMS industry and what quality measures we should be looking at. All of these together, and this group specifically, enables us to have a meaningful assessment of our performance in EMS. And without the work that this group does, I think a lot of our improvement efforts would not be possible. So if any of you have been a part of that, I am greatly appreciative of your efforts there. If you're not sure of the many details about NMSQA, this QR code will give you a full explanation to it. I encourage you to create an account. They're not going to blow up your email, I promise, but it will give you access to the full measure book that you will want to have if you're going to implement any of these in your system. So now we know who makes the measures and we kind of know a little bit about what they are, but let's really dig into what a measure is. I think a lot of us have probably heard about measures, and maybe we know that there are some new measures coming out, but what are they? Well, in our industry, there's going to be 3 common measures that are used. Now, within the healthcare industry as a whole, there are many different types of measures, but let's focus on these 3. We have our outcome measures, which are going to indicate how your system is working. So specifically, what is the impact on the patients and or the providers? right? Usually you're going to have one outcome measure. Sometimes you'll have two, but typically there's one. Along with that, you have your process measures. So process measures are the parts or steps within the system and whether or not they are working as planned, right? Is what I'm changing going to work as designed? We have to have process measures in order to keep track of that. Then we also have our balancing measures. Balancing measures are probably the most tricky measures to come up with and identify, but these measures are going to look at the system from different directions and different angles, right? They're going to tell us, are the changes that we've designed to improve one part of our system causing any other problems in another part of our system? We also refer to some of these as unintended consequences, right? So are there any other additional problems we anticipate from these changes? Now, I mentioned that they can be kind of tricky. If you're currently trying to develop any balancing measures and you're unsure of where to start, I always encourage starting with anything that is time, money, or resource dependent. Those are typically going to be some good balancing measures. So here's a description of what they are, but let's give you an example. So let's talk about electricity. It's getting to be summertime. I live in Texas. I'm sure in California you can all relate, but it is going to get very hot. So I need to watch my electric bill. Now, my outcome is going to be my energy that I consume per month. Okay, so that's my outcome measure that I'm focused on. My process measures are going to be things like my thermostat setting, or how many appliances I use, right? Or how many lights I leave on in the house, right? Now, my balancing measure is going to be looking at when one of the process measures change, right? If my thermostat setting changes, what happens to my consumption or my outcome measure, right? To give you an example, if I turn my AC down to or up to 80 during the Texas summer when it's 112 degrees outside, everybody in my house is probably going to hate me, right? But I'll save some money. In addition, you could also turn your appliances down, right? If I turn my fridge to a more energy efficient setting, I'm definitely going to save some money, but then my beer is not going to be as cold as I really prefer it to be. So time, money, and resources are always very good balancing measures. Outcome measures are what you're trying to improve, and your process measures are going to be the measures that are going to affect whatever your outcome is. Now, we understand what measures are and how they're built and how they're put together. Well, let's look at how we can use them. Well, we use them in a lot of ways, and some of the most important ways we can use them for are understanding our performance. So how good are we performing as a system? And what kind of variation exists within our system currently? This is giving us a deep dive into whatever we're trying to look at and investigating it and what's happening with it. We can also use it for benchmarking. Now, we can use it for benchmarking against other agencies or other systems, but we can also use it for benchmarking against ourselves. And I highly encourage that. Then, my favorite, we get to use it for quality improvement, right? So quality improvement measures are going to tell us which areas we need improvement in. It's also going to tell us what our rate of improvement is set to. In the NMSQA package, if you happen to open that QR code or if you happen to have seen the website before, you're going to be given all of the information that you need in order to start using these measures right away. But in order to do that, I've recognized that you have to have a little bit of a basic background of understanding what the measures are and how they're put together and what things mean. So let's talk about that real quick. In the measure package that you'll get from NMSQA, it'll give you a full description of what the measure is. Here's our measure. This one, Trauma 01, is the percentage of EMS transports originating from a 911 response for patients with injury that are assessed for pain. So it gives you a full description. It'll tell you what your populations are. It'll tell you your components. It'll tell you what the importance of the measure is and whether there's what designation it falls into and the rationale behind it. So a lot of this valuable information, you do not have to go anywhere to find. It's presented right here for you for every individual measure. Now, along with that, you will see a section that is the NMSIS pseudocode. This is how you are going to use the measure in your system, right? So the NMSIS pseudocode is going to tell you what your initial population is going to be. Who are the patients that we want to see? It's also going to tell you what your denominator needs to be and if there's any exclusions for that. Sometimes there are exclusions, a lot of times there are not exclusions. Then it will also tell you your numerator. And this is all going into the pieces that we're putting together so that we can extract data and get a result to see where we're at. Now, pseudocodes, if you're unfamiliar, NMSIS pseudocodes are obviously developed by NMSIS, National EMS State Information Services, and they have been tasked with standardizing documentation elements for the pre-hospital setting specifically. So in essence, these are what your PCRs are built out of. So if you open up one of your charts from a charting software, whatever software you happen to use, you will see different labels of things. For example, patient age goes with a NMSIS code. The NMSIS code for that is ePatient.15. So NMSIS has done a really good job of doing this for us so that we didn't have to do it ourselves. And if you're a participant, which most state agencies in America are, they are given to you with your EMS platform. So having a good understanding of what these codes are, how they're put together, and how you can use them is what's going to help you build reports to look at your own data. Now, let's talk about building a report. For my agency, we use ImageTrend. I'm unsure what software that you're currently using, but if you're using anything other than ImageTrend, what I will say is most reporting softwares for EHRs, at least in the pre-hospital setting, are pretty similar. So you can take the pieces of what I present today and kind of develop that to your software. However, if you're using ImageTrend, you can use this exact example. And it won't bother me at all. You can copy it if you want to. So in Report Writer, we're able to build our own report. And let's say I want to build a report to look at Trauma 01, right? So I'm going to go to my Report Writer. I'm going to create a new EMS incident report. It's going to open up several different pages for me that I'm going to have to select through. The first thing I want to do is set up my columns, okay? Which pieces of information from a chart do I want to see all in one page? From there, you're able to select which individual pieces you want. So for this report, I would like to see the date of the call. I also want to know what the run number is so I can associate this data with a specific call if I need to. Of course, I want to look at the age, I want to look at the pain score, and I want to know what the evaluation of the patient was and their vital signs. That's what our NMSIS or NMSQA measure determines we need to look at. So these are the elements within that. So when you're building a report, you're telling this section, this is what I want to see from the chart. But then we have to also tell the system that we only want to see these pieces, right? So once we've got that set up, the next thing we need to do is set our criteria. Now the criteria is going to look at these pieces only and exclude everything else from the chart. Because I think we could probably all agree that we don't have enough time in our day to sift through entire patient care records. And if you are having to currently do that, this is a very good option for you to save a lot of time in just getting and grabbing the information you only want to see. So our criteria is going to exclude everything else except for what we want to see in this chart. We want to make sure that there is a chart that is going to present to us with possible injury because it is Trauma 01, right? We want to make sure that we're looking at vital signs that have been taken and a GCS that has been at 15, right? That is what the measure determines we need, as well as the level of responsiveness. We need patients that were alert and able to give us a pain score. And then we also need to make sure that these were from 911 calls. Now, in our system, I have to do a few specifics to make sure I'm looking at the right one. The MedStar system is the system that does most of the ambulance transports to the hospitals. So that's where I only include MedStar charts. Now, if you have a fire department that does your transports and then another service that also comes in and does your transports, you want to make sure you include any and all agencies that you need information from in this section. All right. So once we have our criteria set up, oh, and sorry, let me backtrack just a little bit. This filters down here is going to be the option that will tell you to run the report based off of a date range. Very important. Otherwise, your reports may take 40+ minutes to run. So once we have that set up, we're going to go ahead and be able to run the report. So here's our report in its raw state. I have hidden some of our specific agency information, just our run number, but this is what your reporting software will give to you. Now, you've probably seen reports from this, or your agency may already have reports built from this. The big thing is we can look at this page all day long, but it's not really going to give us any valuable information. We have to do something with it. So again, sticking with our minimalist guide here, we're going to put this into a readable report that we can do something with, right? You can also make a report based off of just your numerators and your denominators. I have a few examples here, but do understand that regardless of how you make your report or build it and put it together, what you're looking for is just to follow the explanations and the descriptions in the NMSQA measure that it's telling you you want to look at. You can create your columns to be specific information based off of what you're wanting to see. And so for this report example, all I want to see is a count of specific information. I want to see a count of patients that presented with possible injuries, right? That's going to give me my denominator, and I'm going to make sure that it equals yes. And from here, this is a much more simple version where I just get a total count. So going back to our original report and or this one, we need to do something with it. Now, keeping it very simple, and some have laughed at me for this in the past, but this is how I initially learned. And I think that anyone new to a role, either similar to mine or new to a role upstairs in EMS, will find this valuable, because this is pretty much on every computer software that you can get, and that's Excel. So Excel has a lot of problems, but I also have a very good appreciation for it because of what you can do with it. Now, one thing I've realized and recognized over the years is that nobody taught me how to use Excel or a computer when I was in paramedic school. I'm willing to bet that in a lot of our healthcare education, nobody really set us down and told us how to use computers. So if you're finding yourself struggling because you don't know the software programs, I can completely relate to you. These are not as intimidating as they seem. So spend a lot of time on YouTube. There are all kinds of resources out there. Ask questions. I have gone to many of my colleagues over the years to learn how to use these programs better, and all it takes is just a lot of individual focused time, and you can get what you want to do. So to take a report and be able to do something with it, we can put it into Excel. We can first make a table. I'm a big proponent of that. To make a table, you would just want to select your data and insert a table. That will give you a very good way to filter out specific information. Then you'll want to, of course, save your file and upload your file to any of your designated reporting softwares, right? So we use Tableau. You can use Power BI. If you don't have any of those fancy softwares, you can also make a chart. Excel provides that for you, and they can make some really good run charts that are easy to interpret and anyone can understand them. So once you have your data inserted into whatever system or software you're using, you're able to track your performance over time. And that's where your quality improvement journey really starts to begin, because we're seeing what our performance is over time. Now, this is our actual performance for Trauma 01. For the past, we run it for a whole year at a time. And you can see here that, last May, we were underperforming. We were not doing very well when it came to this specific measure. So that sparked a quality improvement process. What do we need to do to improve? Now, I talked about benchmarking, and I talked about how you can use these measures to benchmark against other agencies. You can also use it to benchmark against yourself. Now, if you want to look at other agencies, here's a QR code for you. You can pull up the NMSIS database that has all of the national elements, and you can compare yourself right now if you want to. But I highly encourage you to benchmark against yourself as well. And this is going to start your process of learning how to do quality improvement in your own system. To do that, we see our performance over time. We can see that we're below our national benchmark, and that's not where we want to be. Then we want to initiate a change. Something has to change, right? And we have to start this quality improvement process and start tracking it. The key point here is that if you're going to track these measures, you need to make sure that you track them over time. This can't be a process where you decide 1 month that you have the time for this, and so you go and pull all this data and take a look at it, and then you get busy and the next month you forget. These should be things that you're routinely pulling up from your system and keeping an eye on. That way, when you have a dip in performance, much like we did, you're able to identify that and say, there's something off and we need to do something about it. So you can see here in our own system, we were below there. We made a change in September. And then after some time, we improved, right? So improvement needs to be sustainable and it needs to be long-term, right? It's great that we improved within that 1 month, basically. However, we were not sure at that point if it was sustainable improvement. And that's what we're after with quality improvement. Is sustainable improvement is improvement that should be celebrated. So let's talk a little bit about what we did. We followed the process of improvement, and I have a few resources that I'll give to you at the end of this portion, but we usually just read the Science of Improvement book. Now, the process of improvement is built on a foundation of every system being perfectly designed to deliver the results that it produces. So when we're using this, it's our framework to develop our test of change, to implement changes, to make sustaining changes that give us that long-term improvement you saw on our run chart. What we do is we perform several different PDSA cycles, or plan, do, study, and act cycles. We'll dig into each section of those, but before we get going on what to change and how to change it, let's cover some basic principles of improvement. The first thing is we need to know why we need to improve, right? We knew we needed to improve on Trauma 01 because we were tracking it, and we knew that we were below the national benchmark. We knew that this measure was one of our organizational goals, and that the organization as a whole, specifically our board members and our invested parties, wanted to make sure that we were being successful with these patients. So it's important to us. We also know, if and when pain is being assessed in our system, we need to know that our providers are able to assess pain in patients and that they understand when to do it and why to do it. We also need a feedback loop to know that improvement is happening. So that comes into routine reporting of this measure, meaning you run it every month, right? And a lot of these reports for these measures will not take you a whole lot of time. So please don't be intimidated by it. There are a few of them that will be very time consuming. Most of them can be done pretty quickly. We also need to develop a change that we think will result in an improvement. So in order to do that, we need to establish a team. Get individuals in the same room that are going to be able to contribute to improving this process. This will help us learn about the system, right? We want to learn about the system as it applies to one of our trauma measures. So one of the first things we should do is get some of our field providers involved in this. And if you're not currently including your field providers in improvement initiatives, I highly recommend that you start doing that. Once we can get them in the room, they can come up with some ideas for change. They can tell us how the system is working from their perspective as frontline people. Then we can start testing a change and tracking whether or not that change is going to work for us. So in our case, for Trauma 01, what we did was we took an in-depth look at our documentation software. We took an in-depth look at our protocol, and we took an in-depth look at what was going into this specific measure. We ended up adding a validation to our run form to require that a pain score get documented when an injury was reported. And you'll see that that was one of the biggest things that led to our improvement, but we didn't jump straight there. We had to know when and how to implement this change before we were able to get to that solution. So in order to do that, we first ask, what are we trying to accomplish? We have to develop what's called an aim statement, which is what we're trying to accomplish, and it has to be measurable, right? It has to be time specific. It has to have a start and end date, and we have to determine who this is for. So our aim for Trauma 01 was to improve assessment of pain for patients with reported injuries to 69% in 3 months. Now, 69% was the national benchmark, so we wanted to be at or above that. This is a goal of our project, and this is the prediction of our results. It's very important that you have a prediction in your aim statement and that you're not too hard on yourself, that aim statements can change. And after some time, if you realize we way overshot this goal, you can adjust it as time goes forward. So what are we trying to accomplish? We have that figured out. Then we need to ask ourselves, how will we know that a change is an improvement? I cannot emphasize this enough. You just have to track it over time. Once a month, run the data. You can start looking at it over time. Then we have to know what change can we make that will result in improvement. So I talked about establishing a team, getting frontline providers involved in our improvement process, asking them what their input is. Are there any barriers to documenting pain? Are they unsure that they needed to document pain? Do they know which types of patients to make sure they document pain on, right? Are they aware of how to do a proper pain assessment? These all go into what we refer to as a driver diagram. So in your driver diagram, here's a very small example for you. You have your aim statement, which is what you're trying to accomplish. And then you have drivers that contribute to your aim statement. So we had some primary drivers, which was our EPCR configuration. And then we also had provider knowledge. From those primary drivers, we can split these off into secondary drivers. Now, these secondary drivers mean that we're taking an in-depth look at what we think may be the problem, but we are learning about our system as we're going throughout this process. This is also a living document. These drivers can change. From your drivers, you will be able to develop good and solid change ideas or change theories that you can start testing in your system. So you can see here that our change ideas for Trauma 01 were adding a validation requiring a pain scale. Seemed very simple, but we didn't know if that was going to be the resolution or not. Then we also looked at moving the pain scale to a better location in the run form. Now for ours specifically, it was way down at the bottom of the vital signs section. Our system requires a lot of scrolling because we document a lot of different types of vitals. And we thought maybe if we put it up higher, we'll get a better result, right? The next thing that we came up with was educating providers on just the importance of documenting pain, right? So it's not that we assume that the providers don't know how to do their job, but we should assume that as our role, it's our job to tell them what are the most important things of their job they should be able to do, right? On a day-to-day basis. They should be able to do good, thorough pain assessments. So that's our responsibility to make sure that they have the tools and the knowledge to be able to do that. So once we were able to do that, we did our PDSA cycle. We planned out our tests of change. We had our objectives. We determined who, what, where, when, and how we were going to test this change. We did the test and we executed our plan and we collected data and recorded our observations based off of that. Then we studied what happened because of the change. So we compared or benchmarked our data against ourselves. And then we went back to our original question. What are we trying to accomplish? How do we know that we made a change that resulted in improvement? And from there, we were able to act on our change, right? So our change of adding a validation was successful because we were able to see that improvement over a long period of time. Using the PDSA cycle in any change that you make in your organization is going to lead to success for you. And remember that a part of the A in the PDSA is that you can either adapt, adopt, or abandon. And I think abandon is one of the hardest ones for us. I know it is for myself, but sometimes bad ideas are bad ideas and you can abandon them and that's okay. It'll just give you room to come up with better ideas. So from this, we have to understand that all improvement requires change, but not all change is an improvement. So I talk about the bad ideas. you're going to go through this process and fail. And I think that the earlier you accept that and the earlier you come to terms with it yourself, the more successful you're going to be, because failure is actually a really good, important step in learning about your system. I've failed a lot of times on many different projects. I've had a lot of bad ideas, and that has all gotten me to a very successful point today. So if you're in a position where you're able to start making some changes, and you're able to look at data elements, and you're able to implement some of these, NIM squared measures, I highly encourage you to investigate this process. Some key takeaways from my previous message are that quality in EMS is absolutely achievable. Anyone can achieve it. I think we talk about it a lot. It is time consuming and it is hard work, but it is very, very rewarding. And while you're learning about it, if you're still new to this process, just keep it very simple. The examples that I gave to you today are very simple, easy, quick ways that you can get started on this whole method, and it will lead to success. And it's something that I did for a while before I even got really deep into the knowledge of quality improvement and the process of improvement. Another thing that I'll highly encourage you is that you should be hesitant to make any assumptions on a system that you don't really understand. And I think that we naturally kind of gravitate towards that because we have a lot of experience in this industry. We've probably been providers for many years. So for us, it's natural to say, oh, well, that's how this is done, and that's what makes sense. But the reality is that you don't always know how the job gets done in your own system, and that's okay. What you should take from that is you have a chance to learn either how it's changed or how somebody else does it. So don't make so many assumptions and spend more time trying to learn about your own system. And again, failure is your first attempt at learning about your system. The easiest way to learn is to fail. One more thing that's really important is including your providers. Not only does including your providers in these processes make them feel valuable, it makes them feel like they're a part of the team, but it gives them the opportunity to understand why we spend so much time focused on things like first pass success, or why we spend time on looking at different measures in cardiac arrest outcomes, right? Neurological survival, or chest compression fraction. What do those mean to the average everyday provider if they're not being given the opportunity to be involved in initiatives that are trying to improve those? I guarantee you, if you start including your providers, you're going to have a very, very good response from them, and they will want to help you improve. One more thing is test changes on a small scale first. And I think this is the foundation of whether or not you can make successful change, is that you can keep the change small and contained while you are working through it, right? We've probably all been a victim to times where things have been implemented in our systems overnight, and all of a sudden we have a very big problem on our hands, and it may take years to resolve that problem. In fact, I'm still working on an issue that arose in 2020 with mechanical compression devices in our system that has taken me up to this point to really get a hold on. So when you keep things small at first and only implement things one piece, one bit at a time, when you have some unintended consequences, you have the ability to control that right away instead of having to come back and clean up the problems afterwards. Now, I bring that example up because sometimes we don't have any control. Sometimes things get implemented in our system no matter what we want to do about it, right? And if that happens to you, and if that's happened in your system, there is still a way you can make an improvement. It just becomes a little bit harder. But using these methods that I've covered today, you can get there, because that's exactly what we did with our mechanical compressions or compression devices, and it's been successful for us. Some more resources for you is the improvement guide. This is practically my Bible. I read this constantly. I've probably read the entire thing multiple times. It's got a lot of notes and highlights in it. It's a little bit pricey, but it's so worth the purchase. The next thing, if you're a data person and if you're the one who's going to be building these measures and compiling all the data for it, I'd recommend the Healthcare Data Guide. Both of these can be purchased off of Amazon. The Healthcare Data Guide has a lot of good information about quality improvement in it as well. So both books kind of work together in conjunction. The other thing I want to highly encourage you is that if you're wanting to get more into this process and you're wanting to learn more than what I was able to cover today, maybe going a little bit deeper into it, the NAMSP offers several courses. They do a 2-day introduction course to quality improvement, which is a really good experience for you. And then they also have a year-long course, which the 2-day course is a prerequisite to before you get to the year-long. So you'd have to take that one first, but both of those are very excellent resources. And they have some really, really good instructors that participate in those classes that will sit with you and mentor you while you try to make changes and improvement in your own system. So with that, I would love to open this up to any questions anyone has.
Thank you very much. That was truly outstanding, and I agree the NAMSP courses are fabulous. I'd like to revisit one of your take-home points. But first, I want to say I knew you were from Texas at the beginning when you said y'all to us. So
yes, I can't hide that.
I understand if you start saying y'all, then it's getting really serious. So I was listening for that and happy you didn't get to that point. I wanted to go back to what you're talking about in terms of unintended consequences and making small changes. In San Diego in particular, we have an enormously complex system, rural, urban, international border, sea border, large military presence. We have tribal nations, so very complex. So I always think of it as like steering a big ship. We want to make small adjustments and not do something big all at once that sounds good, but could have some really big unintended consequences. And I was thinking back to the example you gave with the documentation of pain being higher up on the EPCR and moving that lower as one of the solutions. I was thinking that could potentially create an unintended consequence, right? Because you're maybe improving that, but maybe you're then going to do worse on something that's no longer at the top in terms of the vital sign documentation. So do you have any tips for avoiding unintended consequences by focusing on one thing and what effect that might have on other key parameters that you might want to measure?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point and example that you bring up. So I appreciate that. The way that you can try to prevent, and I say this not lightly, all you can do is try, is come up with balancing measures that are also going to, you think are also going to affect your outcome measure. So let's use the trauma 01. We moved the pain scale up into the run form, right? Well, that potentially put the pain scale before our GCS documentation, right? So one of the questions you ask yourself is, will moving the pain score mean that they're no longer going to document GCS as often? And that's where you have to work with your test groups and get feedback from them to determine, is this feasible? What are the immediate consequences that could be from this? And what is the risk level, right? So if there's a significant risk that we're going to lose very valuable and important measures that we need just because we're making this one change, find a different way to make a change, right? Because at that point, that would tell me that moving the pain scale is not the answer here. What we should do is probably focus on some education elements that will teach people where to go to enter the pain scale. And I think working with the providers yourselves and how they use the software is going to help you figure those things out. So for me, I've been a provider in my system since 2012. I worked in our medical records department and helped build the system that they use to chart with. So I feel pretty confident about my ability to document things, but I am not a brand new 6-month paramedic who's just been introduced to a tablet and who's just trying to figure out how to use the software. They use it or possibly use it in a very different way than I do. Getting a well-rounded sense of feedback from different users will help you get control over those balances, right? That you have to maintain when you're making changes like this. And I think you can apply that not just to documentation changes, but to protocol changes or to, any kind of devices you're going to purchase, right? If you're going to get new pumps, you could get a very well-rounded amount of feedback from your own providers about what pump would be best and why, right? What are the problems that they can find? Because if there's one thing that paramedics can do that I promise you is we can break things. So we're very good at that. And we can tell you where those unintended consequences are before you implement them in your system.
Yeah, I totally agree. We have to work with people on the front lines to make sure things are operationalizable. There's so many times when something sounds like a good idea, but then when you try to implement it, it doesn't work. It's almost like the ivory tower concept in academia, right? You don't know what it's like in the real world.
Yeah,
it's really important.
It very much is. And I think, you know, the longer term, the bigger impact of that is that it can cause frustrations on the end user, right? So another example I can give to you is I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with it or have heard of it, but we have Pulsera in our system now. And it was recently decided that we would be using Pulsera for all of our radio transmissions. So they're no longer calling in radio reports, they're documenting everything through Pulsera. But what they didn't take into account was how much more engaged the provider has to be actively with Pulsera instead of with the patient. And we're working through things now that we've learned after implementation, and that could have probably been avoided.
Really, really good example. The other thing is just that it takes time. Like you have people sometimes who are decision makers at high levels saying, okay, we'll just do this, and think they can just flip on a light switch and make it happen. But there has to be training, there has to be evaluation, there has to be data collection. So I think that's an important concept.
Yeah, and I think that is probably the biggest takeaway that I would encourage you to have from today is that it's okay to take time. And that's probably what we're most uncomfortable with. Just our very nature is to find a problem and come up with a solution. That's what we spend our careers doing, is finding problems. Here's a solution. Here's a problem. Here's a solution. And we're kind of going against that, because what we're doing is we're really drawing out the solution process. It doesn't feel natural to us, and it's definitely not as quick, and it doesn't feel as good. But what it will do is, in the long run, when you have that sustainable change and that sustainable improvement, that will feel really, really good.
Exactly. And that's why we're often doing pilot programs with new types of interventions to see what maybe some of those unintended consequences might be before we implement it throughout our huge system of about 3.3 million population across the county. It's pretty big.
Yeah, that I could only begin to start to imagine what your system looks like. So I kudos to everyone who works in your area and in your departments. Y'all, I'm sure y'all take on a lot of really incredibly hard work.
I got three y'alls. Okay, we're doing well. I'm still not seeing any questions in the chat or any hands. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Certainly, Dr. Vitalani, you must have something to say.
No, great talk as expected and as always. And I'm glad that my color coding in Tableau is still sneaking around there somewhere.
Oh, it's still there. It's alive and well.
Anybody else have questions or comments? All right, well, thank you very much. That was a wonderful presentation, and we really appreciate you taking the time.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And if any questions come up after the fact, I'm just an email away. So feel free to reach out.
Thank you. We'll go
I
ahead.
appreciate y'all's time. Thank you so much.
We appreciate y'all too.
Bye.